Now, I've never been one to knock the next man for getting his, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I do realize that hip-hop is now a form of showbiz. But this has always been something with which you have to be true. So in the year of 1992,
now this is how we do.
At the age of 19, heard the scene. A lot of MCs that do not come clean, frontin' on dealing hard times and rhymes. You see them in the streets and you see no signs of the hell. And they get on stage and tell some old cornball war story. Ring the bell.
Word.
You're faking the funk, talking that extra hard junk. You're probably a punk. And I'ma let you know that this way you just don't cut with the artificial flow.
Nick exotic, break backs and necks. When fakers try to front, they'll get smoked like blunts. My rhymes penetrate like skunk. And your word up, I think they're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
Yo, you're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
Yo, you're faking the funk. Yo, you're faking the funk. Yo, you're faking the funk. Yo, you're faking the funk. You do a song about a current event, get on television and seem hesitant to represent, and that's what we call fraud. You can't keep the streets with a look I sold out award.
Word.
And everywhere has streets that's not trying to hear the whack rhymes over the same stink beats. Cause times are real and I can't feel putting down on the real of real.
Now I'ma let you know, with those freestyle raps, it's time to go. I eject, rejects that step. I'm a vet ready to snap the neck. I shine and rise at the same time. The mastermind of the sport called the rhyme. Now it's time to dump chumps that in front of your professor. What's up?
You're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
Yo, you're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
Yo, you're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
Yo, you're faking the funk.
You're faking the funk.
The era of the whack MC is getting shut down when the main source storms through your town. Cause we just don't play the role of a clown and keep things jumping with the real rap sound. To the crossover rapper with the bleeps.
To all the chumps that's claiming the streets.
You're faking the funk.
Frontin' incredible feats.
You're faking
To
the
the
funk.
girl acting like a prostitute.
You're faking the funk.
Wearing that hooker type suit.
You're faking
To
the
the
funk.
rappers with the big space shoes.
To the artist that doesn't pay due.
You're faking the funk.
Cause exotic to think it's on with the hypertone. I can't be blown cause my rhymes are hard like stone. Don't prepare for the scare cause I'm the one like me, punk. Cut your
You're faking the funk. You're faking the funk. You're faking the funk. You're faking the funk.
For life, she was his first lady, and for almost 3 decades, the Duvalier dynasty ruled Haiti with an iron hand. But then last February, the people of Haiti finally rose up and forced Jean-Claude Duvalier, known to the world as Baby Doc, to flee. What finally triggered the revolution? Hunger, poverty, one of the worst human rights records in the hemisphere? Those are all the easy answers. But when you talk to the people of Haiti, they'll tell you that the critical factor was not him, but her, the First Lady, a Haitian divorcee who won the heart of the president for life and changed our country forever. This was Haiti last February, just after the dictator Baby Doc Duvalier fled the country. But what these familiar scenes did not reveal was the extent to which the passions and anger of the Haitian people were focused not just on the dictator, but also on his wife, Michelle Bennett Duvalier.
The former first lady, she's a bum.
Michelle Bennett, she's a prostitute. She make voodoo to take example, and all the time she take marijuana.
Millions and millions of dollars.
Michelle Bennett,
That's what she meant.
everybody call her is a lesbian.
She was a devil.
Lesbian.
She tried to eat all the little children.
For sacrifice.
Okay.
That's what she
By
meant.
sacrifice.
No charge about the former First Lady seemed too extreme. Throughout the country, chants and lurid songs about Michelle's sex life rang out on the streets. Graffiti and crude drawings appeared on walls. The body of this Tonton Macoute, a hated Duvalier security policeman, was roasted and paraded through the streets of the capital. When we talked to the people who murdered him, they told us that Michel Duvalier had ordered the man to poison the water supply of the capital and that they had killed him before he could carry out her orders. Who told the Macoute to do that?
Qui est-ce qui dit Macoute pour faire ça?
Michel Bennett.
Michel Bennett.
Oui.
But how did it happen that this one woman could have so mobilized the fury of a nation? The story begins 5 years ago in a moment of seeming innocence. June 5th, 1980, in a ceremony so lavish that the Guinness Book of Records lists it as one of the 3 most expensive weddings, Haiti's 28-year-old president for life, Jean-Claude Duvalier, marries Michelle Bennett, a divorcee and mother of 2. If it looked to the world like a grotesque demonstration of extravagance in the poorest country in the hemisphere, to most Haitians watching on television, it was enchanting. A storybook wedding of a king and a queen.
They liked her. They liked the queen. They wanted the queen. They had a queen.
Is that the way she saw herself, as a queen?
I don't think she saw herself as anything less than that.
Bernard Saint-Journet, one of Haiti's leading painters, was a favorite artist and frequent dinner guest of Baby Doc and Michelle.
And she suited the role because she was the first person in those 30 years to understand that show business was the name of the business. And her show business was very well done.
As First Lady, Michelle immediately enlisted Haiti's TV network to promote herself as a champion of the poor and to solicit contributions for her Michelle Bennett Duvalier Foundation. Every day, the elegant First Lady was featured in scenes like this, launching vaccination campaigns, touring hospitals, giving her heart to the people. It was a powerful image that won over even such a symbol of saintliness as Mother Teresa.
I've seen many people coming, and kings and people, presidents and prime ministers, but I have never seen the poor people being so familiar with their heads of state as they were with her. It was a beautiful lesson for me. I have learned something from you. So thank you. And
she was capable of showing that she could be the very best, and in reality, she displayed that she was the very worst.
Joe Namfi, the brother of the new leader of Haiti, businessman and perennial insider, he explained that an altogether different First Lady was surfacing inside the palace.
She took over literally this country, and within 1 year, she had kicked out of the palace Jean-Claude's mother. All of Jean-Claude's mother's relatives, 98 of them, were exiled. So she literally went after the Duvaliers with a vengeance. I mean, to literally exert her power.
As president for life, Baby Doc, with his private army of thugs, the Tonton Macoute, ruled Haiti with unchecked brutality. But by all accounts, he was always dominated by his sister and mother. And once Michelle purged them from the palace, she emerged as the unrivaled force behind the throne.
He was dumb because when Michelle was speaking, and she would shut him up. Yes, she would shut him up.
In the cabinet meeting?
Oh, well, she insulted anybody at any time. Nobody could resist her.
Oblin Jolicoeur, Haiti's omnipresent journalist and gossip columnist, and recently appointed Secretary of State for Information. Were people afraid of her?
I beg your pardon. She frightened everybody. And people avoided her try to avoid her because if she does not get what she wants, she would cry, she would try to break everything. She was hysterical. She would go hysterical.
The system of government that Michelle came to influence so deeply was rooted in corruption. And as First Lady, she demanded a piece of the action for herself and her family. Almost overnight, her father, Ernest Bennett, who was reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy, became a wealthy man. With his daughter in the palace, he paid no export taxes and soon cornered much of the coffee trade. But this was all just a part of the official corruption that had become a way of life in Haiti. The majority of the country's 7 million citizens earn less than $150 a year. And for more than a quarter of a century, the Duvaliers used their power to extort nickels and dimes from every transaction carried out by these desperately poor people. Even U.S. aid shipments were often diverted and sold for profit in the marketplace. By the time of his marriage to Michelle, Baby Doc is said to have amassed a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
He was simply not interested in running a country in a normal way.
What was he interested in?
Money, money, and money.
What about his wife? What was your impression of her?
She was even more greedy than he was himself, because she had to catch up, you see.
When Marc Bazin became Haiti's finance minister in 1982, he quickly became suspect by questioning the national budget, 30% of which, he says, went directly to Baby Doc and Michelle. So $60 million went for his and her personal use?
Absolutely.
Every year?
Oh, yes. And that was just official open corruption because it was coming out of the budget.
But what about the First Lady's foundation and the millions of dollars she had raised on behalf of the poor?
That was just a cover. Just a cover.
Was she taking a lot of money out of it, you think?
Oh, yes, yes. I believe that was a very important source of income for her.
This scene came to symbolize the blind arrogance of Baby Doc and Michelle's regime, the dictator hurling small change to the poor, while he and his wife extorted hundreds of millions.
Michelle came into the government through the bedroom, and she brought down the government in 5 years through her greed.
Since the 1960s, when he was condemned to death by Papa Doc, Ray Joseph, the editor of the Brooklyn-based newspaper The Haiti Observateur, has chronicled the Haitian Revolution. He points to the Pope's visit in March 1983 as the first challenge to Baby Doc and Michelle.
The Pope was going beyond the Duvaliers, standing by him and telling the Haitian people, I don't agree with what they're doing. We cannot have this scandalous wealth side by side with the abject poverty. Things have got to change. And from that speech of the Pope, the message went out that the Duvalier regime could no longer continue the way it was doing business.
Most every revolution has an event that finally triggers a people to action. Unlikely as it may seem, the incident in Haiti was a television broadcast, shown in squares like this across the country on TVs, which the First Lady had installed to show her good works. And what the people of Haiti saw in May of 1984 was this lavish benefit ball, which Michelle had organized on behalf of the poor. Tell me about that $500 plate dinner. What was it like?
Let's say Nero came back and gave a party in 1985 in Haiti. It was Nero. It was it was incredible. It was incredible. Decadence, the champagne that was being offered. And I remember that night they didn't give Dom Pérignon, they gave Krug.
Very expensive.
The most goddamn expensive champagne in the world.
Haiti had never seen anything like it. Ministers' wives dressed in Parisian gowns, a jeweler flown in from Paris to present a $30,000 necklace as a door prize.
I watched this and I said to myself, I wonder how they never understood what they were doing to themselves.
What do you mean? What were they doing to themselves?
Well, this party was broadcast live over Television Nationale, the government television.
So when people watched this ball, I mean, wasn't this a benefit to raise money for poor people?
It was a benefit to raise money. But the clash of that luxury, that display of wealth versus their poverty situation was just too much for anyone to digest.
They have killed all the pigs in the country.
The reaction here in Gonaive, where people still respond with fury at the memory of that party, was to launch the first demonstration in the history of the Duvalier regime. They protested their hunger and called for the end of the dictatorship. But it wasn't until the following year that Michel provided a second spark, this one destined to change the country forever. It came 6 months ago, at a time when Haiti was on the verge of bankruptcy, unable even to buy fuel for its trucks and buses, and facing food shortages. It was just at this moment that Michel and an entourage of 14 set off on a fateful shopping trip to Paris.
And for the first time, people got very angry because Michel spent $1 million for 1 week and then asked for a second million from the governor of the central bank, and she got it. And we understand that she spent $1.7 million.
On what?
On clothes, on paintings, on fur coats, and also refrigerator for the fur coats.
A refrigerator for the fur coats?
Yes, freezers. Didn't you hear what happened when Michel went back to Haiti with all these furs that she bought abroad? That's not the first time she's bought furs. She has special parties for her friends who also have furs. And Haiti is a tropical country. So at that point, they turn on a special room, very cold, like a freezer, really, so they can put on their furs. That actually happens.
In the palace?
In the palace.
Is it really possible that a shopping spree could have ignited a revolution?
The shopping spree was the spark.
And what it did was to ignite rebellions all over Haiti. A revolution was now underway. There were rumors that Duvalier had ordered plane loads of Uzi submachine guns, and there was a fear that the Tonton Macoute were about to be unleashed on the demonstrators. But there were also reports that the President for Life and Michel were preparing to flee.
We are still here.
And then, unexpectedly, just before dawn on the 7th of February, the 29-year-old Duvalier dynasty came to a close as Baby Doc and Michel drove through a gauntlet of newsmen to a waiting U.S. Air Force jet that flew them to exile in France. They had managed to get an estimated $800 million out of the country, leaving behind less than $500,000 in the treasury.
John Claude and Michel Bennett take all money in Haiti.
We have to give the money back.
We have to freeze the money and bring the money back to our people. Over here, all of us. All of us, brothers.
Very good people.
In Haiti, people's anger was reduced to acts of symbolic vengeance. But in New York, Michel's brother was attacked in the streets, and in Paris, the Duvalier's financial advisor was beaten and hospitalized. So what happens now to Baby Doc and Michel? They're safe in the south of France with much of the wealth of Haiti at their disposal. Is this where it all ends?
It cannot end there. We intend to pursue the Duvaliers to the ends of the earth, to bring back the wealth of the country. And we're giving them notice that wherever they go, no matter how long it takes, we will get the money back.
The new Haitian government is now trying to extradite the Duvaliers from France. The French government has put Baby Doc and Michel under a kind of house arrest and has asked them to leave. But no other country in the world is willing to grant them asylum. Meanwhile, the Swiss have frozen all known Duvalier assets.
You don't know what you're talking about. Racism is a real problem.
Today, the emotional battle over housing integration in Yonkers moved to this federal court in Lower Manhattan. Here, so many angry Yonkers homeowners showed up, many were locked out of the packed courtroom. So they spent the hearing picketing and denouncing the federal judge, Leonard Sand.
I think it's ridiculous. I think the judge is a lunatic. That's what I think.
Judge Sand's unpopular because he wants Yonkers to build hundreds of subsidized housing units in the mostly white section where these folks live to overcome what he's ruled as a pattern of racial discrimination in Yonkers housing. But these homeowners and some of their councilmen are resisting. Last night in a raucous meeting, the Yonkers City Council voted 4-3 to reject Sand's court-ordered desegregation plan. That vote sparked the judge to hold today's contempt hearing, which intensified already charged emotions.
I don't think the President of the United States would come to 200,000 people in Yonkers and tell us where to go, who to live with, and that we have to pay for it.
As an overflow crowd was debating the issue of integration inside federal court, Judge Sand was finding the city of Yonkers in contempt of court and imposing a series of potentially crippling fines that could leave Yonkers bankrupt within a few weeks.
An angry Judge Sand called today's hearing a moment of truth for Yonkers and said the Westchester city has become a national symbol of defiance of civil rights. He then fined Yonkers $100, demanding the check by 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. Much more devastating, the fine doubles every day, and it's estimated it would bankrupt the city's $337 million budget by August 24th. While the city plans to appeal, if it loses, the mayor's scared the city will crumble, so he's pushing for a compromise.
Well, I would like to see the council change their vote. So in the next few days, we could purge this contempt. The fines would stop. I hope the damage to the city's financial standing would cease and be reversed. I'm going to work toward that and call a meeting hopefully toward the end of the week to get that vote reversed.
But the homeowners at court today booed the mayor for backing the judge. They're happier with the 4 defiant council members who were scolded by the judge today. Some of those councilmen were also fined $500 a day by the judge and threatened with jail if they don't compromise by August 10th. Some say they're willing to go to jail. The city will soon find out if they mean it. Jane Velez-Mitchell, Channel 2 News.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Racism is a real problem.
The issue is housing integration in Yonkers, but it was here outside a Lower Manhattan federal court that the anger spilled over today. These Yonkers homeowners reacted hotly to the latest moves by the federal judge who sits here, Judge Leonard Sand, to force subsidized housing to go up in the mostly white area where these demonstrators live. The judge says it's necessary to correct the long-running pattern of racial discrimination in housing. It's an issue that invariably sparks furious debate.
The poor slide, the rich slide, the working class, they want to hurt us the most.
They won't be hurt there. I don't feel their property values are going to drop to the point where they're going to have to run like scared rabbits.
The issue came to a head in this emotion-charged meeting last night when the Yonkers City Council voted 4-3 to reject a court-ordered desegregation plan. But at today's hearing, Judge Sand threw a powerful counterpunch. He called Yonkers a national symbol of defiance of civil rights and found the city of Yonkers in contempt of court. Sand ordered Yonkers to pay a $100 fine to be delivered by 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. That fine is to be doubled every day thereafter. That would bankrupt the city's $337 million budget by August 24th. While city lawyers plan to appeal, the harsh fine clearly left Yonkers leadership worried.
Well, within 22 days, the city will be bankrupt.
Today, the 4 councilmen who voted no last night in defiance of the judge were applauded by some homeowners, but scolded by the judge, who called them irresponsible. Some of the unyielding councilmen were also fined $500 a day each, and Judge Sand said all could be jailed if they don't reverse their stand by August 10th. But after the hearing, at least one of those councilmen vowed never to give in.
I am prepared to pay the $500 a day. I'm prepared to go to jail.
The mayor, who's on the judge's side and hence at the receiving end of these demonstrators' boos, hopes the judge's action will force a settlement.
I would like to see the council change their vote. So in the next few days, we could purge this contempt.
If the Yonkers City Council does not now yield, the judge strongly hinted today that the governor should step in and yank those 4 councilmen from their seats. Others are predicting that as the fines begin to cripple the city, the Emergency Financial Control Board will step in and grab the city's financial reins. The mayor says he still hopes to avert all this by forging a last-ditch compromise. In Lower Manhattan, Jane Velez-Mitchell, Channel 2 News.
Last January on a New York woman named Joyce Brown and her battle with New York's Mayor Ed Koch. He worried if the story might not be too local for anyone outside of New York to care about. Was he ever wrong? Not only was Morley's story picked up by Soviet television as an example of how little America cares about its homeless, President Reagan in his Moscow news conference talked about the story as an example of the care with which America deals with its homeless.
I am an adult, a 40-year-old intelligent woman, and I don't need Mayor Koch or Bellevue to tell me where I can live.
She lived on Manhattan's Upper East Side, zip code 10021, said to be the most affluent postal district in the country. It is high-rise, high-life territory where you can spend $50 a week to have your dog walked or $450 a month to have your car parked. Her address was 65th Street and 2nd Avenue, right next door to the Chemical Bank. Ground floor, literally the pavement. Her spot, as she called it, was the hot air vent in front of Swenson's restaurant and ice cream parlor. She went by the name of Billy Boggs or Ann Smith. Her real name was Joyce Brown. He also lives on the Upper East Side, in this gracious home just off Gracie Square, barely a mile away from Joyce Brown's spot.
We're doing exactly what her family would do for her. But in this case, her family happens to be the city of New York.
His name is Ed Koch. He is the mayor of New York. Brown versus Koch, an urban fable for our time.
I'm homeless. That's not a crime.
The homeless have become part of the landscape of New York, of every big and medium-sized city in the nation. 30,000 people call the streets and park benches and stations of New York their home. A legion of lost souls, some of them just unemployed, some completely unhinged. Some studies claim that a majority of the homeless are mentally ill. 5 years ago, Mayor Koch set up a program called Project Help. Teams, including a nurse, a social worker, and a psychiatrist, venture forth to identify and monitor the homeless with mental problems. They also hand out sandwiches and clothing. If an individual, in the team's opinion, appeared to be an immediate threat to themselves or others, he or she would be picked up and committed to mental hospitals involuntarily.
I decided after going out with Project Help myself several times, and independently of them, that it is terrible to see these people who are lying in their own feces, who are clearly gross mental cases, who if they were your mother or your sister or a family relative, you would want to pick up and take to a hospital right away, even if they resisted because they're mentally incompetent to make such a judgment.
The mayor and his advisors decided last fall to expand the guidelines on who could be committed. Instead of just those who might be considered an immediate threat, they decided to commit those people that the teams decided could be a threat in the, quote, foreseeable future. It gave Project Help sweeping, some would say questionable powers. Under the new guidelines, the very first person Project Help picked up was Joyce Brown. She was committed against her will to a special psychiatric ward at Bellevue Hospital.
I was definitely the wrong one that they did pick on.
How do you mean that?
Because I'm sane, I'm not insane. And there are thousands out there they could have used for a model. I'm the wrong one.
You get wildly conflicting versions of Joyce Brown's life on the streets. Some people say she was deranged and abusive and would even attack people. Others, like some of the waiters in Swenson, said she was a perfectly rational woman, and they would often buy her a cup of coffee and talk about the news, talk about television shows. One person who's absolutely certain, however, about Joyce Brown is Ed Koch.
When I saw her, she had been there for maybe 15 months in the winter and the summer, defecating in her clothing, or if she were maybe more lucid, on the sidewalk, not in her clothing, but on the sidewalk, refusing help. That if you mentioned to her, won't you come to a shelter, she would become enraged, and therefore you must never use that word. And a woman clearly in need of help.
Why didn't you go to one of the shelters? There are a number of shelters in the city where you could have been warm and fed.
Shelters are very dangerous. I've been in one before. The people that you're there with, you don't know why they're there, what brought them there. Some are insane, some are criminals. They're very dangerous people, and they're not kept up good.
You cannot rationally say that it is safer to lie out on the streets of the city of New York, where there is crime to a far greater degree than there is in our shelters. When someone says it's safer to lie out on the streets, on a park bench or on a sidewalk, that in and of itself is a bizarre statement.
At Bellevue, 5 city psychiatrists examined her. Their diagnosis, that she was delusional, a paranoid schizophrenic. Paranoid schizophrenic or not, Joyce Brown was savvy enough to call the New York branch of the American Civil Liberties Union for legal help. Director Norman Siegel and attorney Rob Levy were quick to respond.
After I was done talking to her, I didn't think I'd spoken to a mental patient. She sounded more like a board member of the Civil Liberties Union. She's a dyed-in-the-wool civil libertarian who really knows what she wants.
This is the United States of America, the Constitution, freedom of choice. If that's what the way the person wants to live their life and they're an adult, who am I to say that they can't do that? Now, if the person is committing a crime, that's a different story. But if they're just sitting on the street, dirty and nasty, that's not a crime. As far as using the pavement as a toilet, I didn't have access to a bathroom. There were times when I'd go to restaurants and ask them, could I use their bathroom? And they would say, no, you can't, even if I offered to buy something.
You were abusive to people, to passers-by?
No, I was not.
A lot of people gave you money. If they gave you paper money, you would burn it up. You kept the loose change.
I only needed $7 to eat per day. I never kept any more than $7 per day because I was on the street and I could be mugged.
Was that reason to burn up the money?
It depended upon the manner in which they gave it to me, whether or not I burned it.
How do you mean?
Well, sometimes they would throw money at me. Just ball it up and throw it at me. Now, that's not the way you give people money. Everyone doesn't want to live on the street. But if that's what they want to do, let them do it.
Joyce Brown is rational, coherent, articulate, today just as she was when she was on the street. She has a track record of living on the street for over a year, keeping herself warm, providing food for herself, entering the hospital in good physical condition. A person like that simply doesn't meet the civil commitment standards under the Constitution or under existing law.
Siegel and Levy teamed up with attorney Eric Friedberg to prepare Joyce's case. They brought in 3 of their own psychiatrists to examine her. Those doctors found that she was not mentally ill. Defecating in the streets is not nice, they concluded, but it is not delusional. The case became a psychiatric standoff, a matter for a court to decide. In this special courtroom set up in Bellevue Hospital, they argued her case before Judge Robert Lippman. The judge ruled in favor of Joyce. Mayor Koch was not pleased with his decision.
He said he's basing it on his observations, personal observations of Joyce Brown. Now, he didn't see her on the street. There are very few people out on the street defecating in public, very few. In fact, if you went out on the street and found such a person, you would say, bizarre.
And I spoke to her, and I got to tell you, she was lucid.
Sure.
She was not delusional.
Sure.
She had
Shows what a hospital setting will do. If you give someone who's paranoid, schizophrenic, a lot of attention, and you embrace them with love and affection, you give them 3 meals a day and a clean bed.
2 lawyers.
And 2 lawyers and a lot of TV, they're going to rise to the occasion.
The city appealed the judge's decision and won, so Joyce remained here in Bellevue. Her lawyers immediately appealed that judgment, and they're awaiting a decision. Meantime, they've advised Joyce to refuse all medication, and the city is barred from giving her any medicine against her will. Then last Tuesday, the city released her. She agreed to stay in a hotel where there are counselors available. Bellevue doctors said since they were barred from giving her antipsychotic drugs, there was little they could do for her. She does have a history of mental illness. She was committed once. So how can you claim that here is a perfectly insane, rational person being victimized by the city?
Her prior psychiatric history was a brief period of voluntary hospitalization in New Jersey. And the issue is not what happened to her in the past, but how she is now.
What you're saying is that living on the street is a perfectly sane and rational alternative lifestyle.
Living on the street is something that you or I may not choose to do, but it is not per se mental illness. In some cultures, living on the street is not considered as eccentric or abnormal as it is here.
In some cultures, eating human flesh is not considered abnormal as well.
Well, we're not going that far. We had, one of our psychiatrists was from India, and he said that there are people who actually have money to live in houses who choose to live on the street in India.
Oh, please. That's such a ridiculous statement. It's not perfectly normal here.
In a civilized society, I think that we all want the streets to be clean, the people to be clean, the people to be well looked after.
Is that my problem, that the economy is so bad that there are no places for people to live? In a civilized society, you don't just go around picking up people against their will and bringing them to the hospital when they're sane just because of a mayor's program. All of this is political. I am a political prisoner because of Mayor Koch.
Don't you have some qualms about using a law in which psychiatry is used to deprive someone of their liberty?
Please, this is not the Soviet Union where she's a political prisoner. Is anybody suggesting that Joyce Brown is a political prisoner?
Joyce Brown.
That shows a bizarre statement. There's no reason in the world for the city of New York to hold her against her will, except for the fact that we don't want her lying in her feces on the sidewalk, not because it offends people who pass by, but because it's not compassionate.
To help resist the Project Help teams, the civil liberties lawyers have their own projects. They go out among the homeless, handing out flyers, advising people of their rights.
You got the right to a lawyer, all right? And you got a right to a hearing.
The lawyers say the city is motivated not by compassion, but by a desire to put the unsightly out of sight. Joyce Brown says if she's crazy, she was driven crazy by Project Help.
They harassed me for months. I had been under surveillance like I was a criminal. They played games. They would send one person to try to talk to me, pretending that they were my friend, right, or wanted to be my friend. I'm not a child, and I don't expect to be played with. They knew I did not like them. They were well aware of the fact. Now, if you know someone does not like you, then you don't bother them.
Who believes that? It's ridiculous. Project Help, they are saints. I've been out with them. I mean, you and I, would we go and someone who is lice-ridden, would we go within 10 feet of them to offer them help? I mean, let's be honest with one another.
Not.
We would not. These people are saints.
Her lawyers say that the reason you went after her was because the sensibilities of the rich people on the Upper East Side were being offended.
Her lawyers are so outrageous. That's why I send no money to the New York Civil Liberties Union.
You call them loonies?
I have called them loonies in this case, and I'll tell you why. Their first charge was that this was racial, because Joyce Brown happens to be black, and that somehow or other we're running around picking up blacks in white neighborhoods. Untrue, because more than 50% of the people who are in the Bellevue program are white.
More and more people who are homeless are rejecting the shelters and are out on park benches, are sitting on the streets, are on heating grates. I submit that unless the person meets the criteria under the mental hygiene law, or two, they're breaking a criminal law, unless you have either of those situations, society at large cannot remove them against their will. We are a constitutional democracy. America prides itself on a rich tradition of respect for individual liberty, and that's what's at stake here.
You really think that it's really a question of an individual choice, nothing to do with the condition in which you live. It's really just a matter of choice.
It's my choice, my life, and my body, and I'll live it as I see fit.
As my mother would have said, if the judge decides that Gesundheit, I've done all I can do. Gesundheit means it's up to God, to her best health.
At the time of the first broadcast, Joyce Brown left Bellevue, and in a flurry of publicity, she and her lawyers told how she would start life anew, would find a job, and would prove the mayor wrong. Shortly after that, she was back panhandling and shouting at passers-by. but not living in the
It
streets.
began with a violent clash between the police and a suspected criminal, and it led to a city's worst riots in recent memory. It's not Los Angeles last spring, but New York just last month. But there's more behind what happened on the streets of New York City that we are going to tell you about tonight. And it reaches far beyond Manhattan to another place, in fact, to another country. Harold Dow brings us a tale of two cities bound together by dreams, by drugs, and increasingly by death.
July 4th, 1992. New York's Dominican community in Washington Heights explodes in outrage.
Gunshots, you hear that? That's gunshots. Everyone's nervous. You don't know where the gunshots are coming from. People are burning things, throwing things at us all left and right.
As you know who they messing with, you know, Dominicans. They know better. Get on!
2 deaths, over 100 arrests, 69 injuries, 14 buildings torched, 121 vehicles set afire. It all started with the death of this man, 24-year-old Jose Kiko Garcia. Garcia was killed in the hallway of this apartment building by undercover police officer Michael O'Keefe. Police officials said Garcia was killed after he pulled a gun. Members of the community say Officer Michael O'Keefe planted the gun and then murdered Garcia only because he was a Dominican.
They got license to kill Dominican. They has to be stopped. You don't see this in downtown. You don't see people getting shot at downtown. Only up here. Why? Because we Spanish? Because we black?
The killer with a badge. He come in here, rob Kiko, make him to put his hand like this, break his fingers over here.
His name is Ulysses Anico. He says he was there and saw what happened to his friend. He later told his story to the district attorney.
When the police, after he break his fingers, throw him here, boom, he banged his head on the door. That's his blood. After throw him Kiko here, Kiko was asking for her, for his life. No me mate, no me mate, please don't kill me.
He says this is where Garcia, unarmed and offering no resistance, was shot and killed by Officer O'Keefe.
That's his blood right here.
Oh, man.
Police officers Clayton Bullock and Scott McHugh have a different view of Jose Kiko Garcia, the man shot by Officer O'Keefe.
This guy's a wanted, convicted drug dealer. Here they putting a good cop. And they slandering him, putting his name all over the paper, trying to make him seem like a bad guy. And little Mr. Innocent over here. Meanwhile, this guy's a convicted drug dealer. Wanted.
The two officers say that to understand the riots that followed Garcia's death, you first have to understand the streets of Washington Heights.
I heard from facts that I know from being around here on the street, a lot of guys, a lot of people were paid to do that.
Paid to riot?
Paid to riot. This is known to be the drug capital of New York, and the violence due to the influx of drugs that's up here is really perpetual as far as anything. Any given moment we could be sitting here, we got to rush out here, the shots fired, shooting, any given night. We just
driving around the corner, you have somebody shot right in front of you.
Yeah.
Just going around the corner.
Violence is routine on the streets they patrol. 1 week after Garcia was killed, there was another shooting in broad daylight over drugs. Semi-automatic weapons fired, 3 dead, including this man on the sidewalk. They were all Dominicans, but there is more to this street story than meets the eye. Because when their bodies were sent home for burial, all 3 came to the same place in the Dominican Republic, San Francisco de Macorís, Kiko Garcia's hometown. The cross in this cemetery stands over the sign that says it all. Este es uno de los caminos de las drogas. It means this is one of the roads that leads from drugs. Many young men from the Dominican Republic leave for the United States with dreams of wealth and adventure. But within the last year, at least 160 of them have returned in coffins. Number 161 was the man shot dead on that Washington Heights sidewalk.
Tenemos informes de que muchos se dedican allá
We have information that when drug dealers from San Francisco de Macorís are in the United States, they are dedicated to what is called tumbe. That means they kill each other over drug territory.
He is a high-ranking Dominican police official. We agreed not to reveal his identity because he works undercover.
When one looks at the city of San Francisco de Macorís, one sees mansions, satellite dishes, big expensive cars, in a country where the average per capita income is a little more than $600 a year. How could this be?
As the sale of drugs is so profitable in the United States, most of these Dominican organizations send the money that they make by selling drugs to the city of San Francisco de Macorís. This money is invested in luxury homes as well as luxury vehicles. They buy big businesses as well as farms.
And when the dead drug dealers return to San Francisco de Macorís, they are buried with respect and honor. And many of their crypts are marked with pictures that seem to capture that air of defiance. And in this same cemetery where so many drug dealers are buried lies Jose Kiko Garcia, the man whose death sparked the riots in Washington Heights.
Kiko didn't belong to that group. It hurts me. It hurts me so much that they call him a drug dealer.
Garcia's mother and his sister Alicia remember a hard-working young man who only wanted to get an honest job and help support his family.
Did he sell drugs?
You can tell by the conditions that we live in here and by the conditions that we live in New York. All you have to do is look, and you can see that Kiko was not involved in that kind of business.
The Garcia family also points to Kiko's funeral, which they say was not typical for a drug dealer, but was a protest. They say Kiko was unarmed, even though the police say they found a gun on his body.
If Kiko did not have a gun, where do you think the gun came from?
No, los policías, porque nosotros fuimos al cuartel y ellos cargan dos policías.
The same night that they killed Kiko, we went to the police department, and every policeman we saw had 2 guns on them. We think that the revolver was put on Kiko.
We stand behind Officer O'Keefe fully and completely and know that ultimately he will be exonerated.
Phil Caruso is the head of the Policemen's Union.
All right, let's put it in perspective. Mr. Garcia was an illegal alien to start with. He was a convicted felon who had been convicted of selling drugs. He was carrying a loaded gun at the time of his death.
So who's right? Was Jose Kiko Garcia murdered, or was it a justifiable police shooting? Here's what we do know. Garcia was convicted of selling drugs 3 years ago. He was on probation. At the time of his death, he had cocaine in his body. And there are other questions. What were the circumstances that led up to the shooting? Was Officer O'Keefe in a life-threatening situation? Did he have to kill Garcia?
When you see what's happened to Officer O'Keefe, you feel he got a negative rap. Would you hesitate in a situation?
No way. The most important thing about this job is going home today.
Bottom line.
No matter what?
No matter what.
When something like that happens, though, you're not thinking what's going to happen after this. You're only thinking about what's happening this very second. You know, you're not worried about what is the press going to do to me.
You have to make a decision on whether to live and die. And nobody can call it, but everybody can be a Monday morning quarterback. When you're out there, things happen. You got to do what you got to do.
I don't think it's surprising that other officers stand behind a police officer that they feel has put his life on the line for them.
Robert Baum is in charge of the Criminal Defense Division of the Legal Aid Society of New York City.
I've been practicing law for 21 years. I've handled thousands and thousands of criminal cases. I have heard complaints from many individuals that I have represented that police officers have planted guns on them. Some of those allegations were just too credible for me to dismiss.
Baum says his office reviewed gun and drug cases in which O'Keefe was the arresting officer and found that several of them had to be dismissed because of problems with the evidence. There is an uneasy peace on the streets of Washington Heights these days. The police and the community eye each other suspiciously as the war between rival drug gangs continues to claim lives.
It's going to get real bad. Badder than it is. It's already bad. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Honest, hard-working Dominicans like Regina Garcia say they are the ones caught in the middle between the dealers and the police, and they are the ones who suffer the most. This is the place where my son Kiko slept, she says. I feel alone now. I'm dying. I'm dying. Meanwhile, in the Dominican Republic, the children of San Francisco de Macorís say they will never stop trying to come to the United States.
It's a gamble. Some of us will come back with a lot of money, and some of us will come back dead.
A grand jury is now investigating the circumstances surrounding the death of Kiko Garcia. New York City officials, meanwhile, are reaching out to the Washington Heights Dominican community. They're concerned about the reaction if the neighborhood does not agree with the grand jury's finding. We'll be back. For many of us, it took the Los Angeles riots to draw our attention to a problem that has been festering in that community for years. And it's the children who are the most vulnerable. When they wrote songs about carefree childhood, school days, surely they didn't have these kids in mind. These children live in Watts, and each morning they make their way to class here at the 102nd Street School, an island surrounded by crime-infested housing projects. In these streets, random violence has become a way of life. And many of these youngsters have known the pain of seeing a loved one murdered.
My name is Tyra Riley. I'm 10 years old. My mother died. She got shot. My name is Clarence Withers. I'm 11 years old. My brother died. He got shot.
My name is Skylar Ray Dudley. And my mother died because my uncle ran her over. And I'm in 2nd grade. And I'm 7 years old.
Children have been telling stories like this to counselor Jesse Freeman and psychologist Lillian Duncan ever since the two began working here 5 years ago.
Every week we'd come on Monday and someone else had gotten shot, or a child knew somebody who got shot if it wasn't their immediate family. And we're hearing this over and over.
One morning, children kept coming to school talking about having to pass around a body.
Until last year, Dr. Melba Coleman was principal of the 102nd Street School. And all of the kids had to walk past the dead body?
Many of them.
Soon after that incident, a man was murdered right outside the kindergarten.
And I guess he had about a half dozen shots in him, fell and died right there. But that's the kind of thing the children live with all the time, and that day it was brought to our front door.
Dr. Coleman knew she had to act. The children were being traumatized and needed help. And although the school couldn't afford to provide counseling for every child, Dr. Coleman, psychologist Duncan, and counselor Freeman put together a pilot program designed to help the ones who needed it most, a sort of grief therapy for those youngsters who had someone die in their family.
So something sad happened for everyone, right?
Yes.
Is it okay to be really sad when someone dies that you love?
Yes.
Okay. Is it okay to cry?
Yes.
For many of these kids, at first talking about what happened to them is too painful. But they take comfort from the other children who've had similar experiences and eventually start to open up.
Luz, why do you come here?
Because my uncle died.
Luz and Felipe are brother and sister. They were standing next to their uncle when he was shot.
How did he die?
I saw 3 men, and one had a gun and one had like a thing right here. The other black man said to the other one, kill him, and he shot him. And he died in 2 minutes.
Were you there then?
Yes, I was with my daddy, my little sister, me, and him.
And Clarence, what about you?
Some boy shot my brother in front of the liquor store. He was using the phone and coming out of the liquor store, and they came from around the corner and out of the alley. Then they just started shooting him. They shot him probably 20 times or more.
Being able to talk about it is the first stage, rather than to just hold those feelings in Oftentimes they're not able to talk to anyone, not their parents, their peers. They carry around the fears, the hurt, and the pain, and there's no one to share it with.
But now, at least for an hour a week for 12 weeks, they're able to share it with Duncan and Freeman.
Okay, look in the mirror and see if that looks angry enough to you, Skylar. How do you look when you're angry?
Because many of these youngsters have difficulty expressing themselves, Freeman and Duncan encourage them to show their feelings in other ways.
It doesn't matter about the color, you just draw.
Often they draw things they're not able to speak about.
This man crying, that's my brother, and that's my other brother. We started crying.
You started crying when you found out that your mom had been shot? Is that it? Okay. Yeah, it was a very, very sad time.
Demetrius and his brother Tyrone are both struggling to come to grips with what they've been through. Since their mother's murder, the boys had been living with Dorothy Tolliver, their grandmother.
I know this is not easy for you and the boys, but can you tell me what happened?
This man, him and my daughter had a fight, and he shot her 4 times.
And where were the boys?
This one, she was holding him. They had stopped fighting, and she had picked him up. And he started shooting. This one was playing with basketball across the street. And when he came across the street, his mother was sitting in a chair.
So when he came home, she was dead?
Right.
Because of what the boys had seen, Mrs. Tolliver knew they needed professional help. They were fighting all the time and failing in school. But at first, she couldn't find anyone who would help them.
Every time I tried to get them in a clinic, they told me that they had to be sent by a doctor. And every doctor that I went to, they told me that they were going to outgrow it.
The doctors just said they would outgrow it?
They'll outgrow it.
That everything that they saw, they didn't need any kind of help.
No counseling. They said they'd outgrow it.
Then she heard about the group at school and said things started to get better. Like most of the children here who've lost someone, Tyrone and Demetrius would like to see their mother just one more time.
What kind of things would you like to say to your mom if you could talk to her?
I love you. And will you come back?
Is that okay to wish the person, even though they're dead, is it okay to wish that they could come back?
Yes.
But can the person come back?
No.
All right, but we can still wish that.
Because we miss them, right?
Yeah.
Anytime someone dies that we love, we wish that they were here.
Have they been so scarred that they'll never be able to recover from this?
Who knows? You don't know which child will rise from these events and these catastrophic occurrences in their lives and really come out and make something of themselves. Our job as educators is to assume that they all will make it and give those interventions, give that nurturing and that caring that all of them need.
Think about something that happened on the inside of the house with the person that died. That's a good starting place.
Okay. One of the things we try to stress is the good memories. We really stress, even though the person is dead and they're not coming back, you have good memories. So we try to replace some of the good memories with the last traumatic one that they had. Scarlett, this looks really interesting. Would you like to share it with us?
It's my mother throwing me up in the house.
Throwing you up in the air, was that fun for you? Oh, yeah. I think you had a smile on your face in your drawing, huh?
Skylar was in the house asleep when his mother was murdered. Derek was on the front porch and watched his uncle run her over with his truck.
Derek, what about your first page?
It's a picture of my house.
Is anything happening at that house that's special about the person who died?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us?
We used to watch TV in the house.
Very good.
And play games in the house.
I couldn't help them, I know that.
Since the murder, Kim Banks is raising both Derek and Skylar.
Your group has really helped them a lot.
Because it's also hard for the adults, Freeman and Duncan try to stay in close touch with them to make sure they're doing okay. But of course, everyone's main concern is the children.
Tyrone was closed before, but now he's just like a different person.
Well, they, since they've been coming to this program, they talks more about it. At first, they didn't, they didn't ask no questions. They didn't talk about it.
Dorothy Tolliver, Tyrone and Demetrius's grandmother, often drops by. So does Carolyn Withers, Clarence's mother. Clarence was the boy whose brother was shot down in front of the liquor store.
He comes home and say, "Oh, I thought I was bad, but somebody else lost their mother." And then he'll share some of the other children's story, and he's more open. He can tell it all. It's a wonderful program.
Louis, let me see your picture.
Because drawing is such an important part of the program, the kids wanted to make sure I saw some of their work.
So what does yours say?
My uncle ran over my grandmother for nothing. I cried all night. I feel better now.
You feel better. Why do you feel better now?
Because I'm in a group.
Does it help you to come here?
Yes.
Well, who can tell me why it helps?
Because they make you feel good, they make you feel better.
What is it that makes you feel better?
That we talk about it, share our feelings.
Do you ever get afraid?
Not no more.
Still, the fears, the sadness, and the hurt are never too far from the surface.
These are nice pictures. This is when she was a little girl.
As part of the therapy, the children are encouraged to bring in photographs of the person who died and share them with the group.
This is my mom.
But when Skylar showed pictures of his mother, he got very depressed.
So I don't want you to go away feeling sad. Not today, okay?
The difference is that for Skylar and the rest of these children, someone's there to help.
Because we've had a good day, and we did a lot of talking, and it helps the hurt to go away. So I want you to keep talking about it. It's okay. See, we looked at the program, and we started talking, and we know things like that will make you sad, because then you start remembering. So I don't want you to go away feeling sad, okay? All right? You're going to be okay.
Is this a program that you think should be adopted by other school districts?
I'm convinced of it. Society cannot afford to write these children off. If we don't pay in terms of intervention and caring for these children, we'll pay in terms of incarceration, in terms of mental illness, in terms of criminal behavior. And if we're talking about having these children be one day productive members of society, we've got to attend to this task.